Welcome to the EXCELcast. My name is Mark Clegg. I'm Director of Entrepreneurship and Career Services here at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And I'm here with members of the JACK Quartet. Right?
It's great to be here.
John, Ari, Chris, Gavin, great to have you here at the University of Michigan.
Good to be here.
So tell me a little bit about what your roles are in the quartet. I mean, obviously, quartet, illustrious tradition going back centuries, right? Some of the greatest repertoire in Western European classical music. But you guys are also pioneers, sort of bringing a lot of new music to the fore. But tell me just a little bit about what you do in the ensemble.
Yeah, I can. The most important thing we do is play our instruments. So I'm the violist. These guys were violinists and cellists. And early on, we recognized that there were a bunch of roles that we needed to take on to take care of all the responsibilities that happen behind the scenes.
So the business side.
Yeah, because it wasn't just falling into our laps. We needed to be proactive about promoting ourselves and making opportunities happen for ourselves. And we identified all these responsibilities over time, taking care of bookings, taking care of the finances, even just organizing ourselves as a business was a big responsibility. Public relations. The list sort of just goes on and on. It never
Did that
stops.
sort of develop over a couple years, or did you pretty much have a vision? Because you're a nonprofit now, right?
Yeah.
Was that right from the beginning, or did that start a little bit later?
Well, we when we started out, I mean, we had a few concerts here and there over a couple of years, and then it was 2007. We were getting our first real paid concerts, and it was like our first real season, and so we needed some way to manage the small but significant amount of money for us at the time coming in, and so we decided at that time actually to form a general partnership, which is a very easy thing one can do. We went down to the City Hall in Manhattan and signed we each owned 25% of Jack. That was and so that was how we started. But it was that very day after we signed these papers, it was the first day of a week workshop with the Kronos Quartet at Carnegie Hall, one of these Weil Institute educational opportunities. There were like 5 quartets there, and or maybe it was 4 quartets, whatever. It ended at the end of the week in a big performance in Carnegie Hall. We had coachings with Kronos all week on their repertoire, and then classes with them and talking about how they're organized as a quartet and what they've done with their career. And it was that day that they gave a lecture on being a nonprofit. And especially David Harrington, who was the first violinist of the Kronos Quartet, had this vision of Kronos from the very beginning that was really unlike any other group at the time. And now there's a lot of quartets and new music ensembles and various other kinds of ensembles that have become nonprofit. But Kronos was one of the first to really go this route for a small organization. Because orchestras, of course, have been this way for a long time. And so they became a nonprofit in like the 70s, right when they were starting, and it helped them grow into the really big organization they are in today. I'm one of the most successful probably the most successful string quartet around. So we were very much inspired by that talk, and so we looked at each other and said, "This is what we have to do." And it took a couple of years after that to go through all the process of becoming a nonprofit, but in time it's been really helpful for us.
Right. So you have a board of directors, you accept donations, you apply for grants, all that stuff.
All that stuff.
Yeah. So that gives you a different range of opportunities than you would have had if you're just a general partnership.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it also helped us to sort of clarify our mission, because you have to create a mission statement, and just identifying what we are and what we do and what's the value, what's the educational purpose, because we're under the educational division of nonprofit. So yeah, and it helped us to clarify what our vision is and what we wanted to do, which is present and promote new music and bring that to audiences and educate the public about it. Also working with young musicians and composers.
Yeah, so in a nonprofit, you get that sort of tax advantages because you're providing some kind of social good, right?
Yeah.
And so advocacy for new music is sort of where you put your brand. And was that modeled on Kronos, or did you guys really sort of latch on to new music as your thing?
Well, I think Kronos was definitely the model for how arts nonprofits, especially smaller chamber groups, can do this. I don't think there were many string quartets that were, if any, before Kronos that were taking the nonprofit model and running with it. Larger arts organizations, for sure. As far as our repertoire choices, we like to see ourselves encompassing a lot of things. Like Kronos deals a lot with well, they've worked with a lot of American composers as well as world music. There's another group, the Arditi Quartet, that does a lot of European modernist kind of composers, and we see ourselves as kind of overlapping these worlds. So our niche is not modeled after any one quartet, but we're trying to bring as many connections between the different kinds of new music repertoire that are out there into sometimes one program.
Okay. Yeah, so I think when we started artistically, our interests were very broad. I mean, initially I think we were known as a quartet that did thorny avant-garde music. In fact, that was a direct quote from New York Times on several of our early, the first few times that they, publicized our concerts in the listings, which was a big deal for us in New York. But they said it's JACK Quartet specializing in thorny avant-garde music, and I think we all saw that and we were like, well, we do play this music, but we were like, we have to change that, or it was just never our goal to be that quartet. So I mean, and we have our interests are very broad, including the repertoire that Kronos made famous and composers that they've worked with quite a bit, and then in the repertoire of the Arditi Quartet, both groups which we studied with early on, which was really important for us. But then I think since we've premiered so many pieces over the years, in a way, I feel like we're forging our own path and our own repertoire, which is broad, very vast in terms of the styles and different things that we like to do. But while we started from the kind of the vision of Kronos and Arditi kind of putting it together, we've kind of, I feel like, gone in our own direction, and we have our own interests now.
So did your, for lack of a better word, the business term was like brand identity, right? What you guys do and how that sort of gives you a sense of who you are. But it seems to me a lot of it is just driven by your own passion. I mean, you're doing music that you love to do, right? So do you ever run into, I mean, sort of the larger topic I think today is sort of this, how do you get the art to match with the money, right? Are these things that are warring against each other, where you're trying to make money despite the fact that you don't want to have the art be profitable or commercial, or is the money obviously something you need. You got to pay the bills. You got to be able to get on the plane and fly everybody to the festival, right? There's costs to making art happen, right? So
gotta support our families.
Yeah, you gotta. Yeah, so we have to find a way to make these things, support one another, be like synergistic rather than be in conflict. But yet, so much of what we talk about in music is sort of like art versus money, right?
Right.
That art is corrupted or selling out, right? Is one of the terms. Like no one wants to be a sellout. But then we just don't talk about money at all, right? Because it's dirty or it pollutes the sort of ideal realm of the art.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe with this sort of brand identity, how did that come about? Is it sort of, you have these models, but you obviously have your own interests, right?
It's something we never even really discussed in the beginning. We just knew that we were passionate about this music and we wanted to perform it. And I feel very fortunate that we have this, that back then we had this unified desire. And they weren't identical desires, but they all informed each other into this quartet product. And so we didn't have to develop that product, it just existed. But we do have a product and people are interested in it, and I feel fortunate that there is a community that is curious about all this different types of contemporary music that we're playing. Some of our audiences like certain aspects of it, and other audiences like different aspects, but we do provide that service. And I would say that for musicians who maybe don't have as clear of a product, maybe the product is something more general, just Western chamber music from the traditional canon, and there's nothing preventing anyone from doing that. I think it's a very noble and exciting field to be in, but it does require a little bit more creativity when it comes to marketing.
So you do social media for the group?
I do.
Yeah, so I mean, I imagine that this kind of authentic sharing, right? So you're showing the group doing what it's doing, presumably taking pictures and all that kind of stuff.
Making vines.
Yeah, making vines. Yeah.
Vines of dogs sometimes and cats.
Yeah.
So what works and what doesn't? I mean, is it that authenticity that's important to try to show to your fans?
Well, it's interesting. I think our marketing happens in a number of ways. One is just by the repertoire we play, which doesn't really appear that much in our social media. Our social media is more fun, like silly videos from wherever we happen to be, or cats sleeping on our scores, it's like, and that does create and paints a picture of who we are as four people, but it doesn't really share the product that we are offering as a nonprofit. And that really happens more through the presenters who are presenting us. And they're showing their audiences, who are our audience as well, what we're up to. And then, I think just artistically what we're doing, it does speak for itself. The fact that we're working with composers from all around the world in so many different styles, people see that and they recognize that that's what we're about.
Right. So social media is sort of the human side.
Yeah.
And the presenters are doing the art product delivery, right?
There is the monthly newsletter where you say what we're up to and list the concerts and what's coming up. And
That's true, and
so,
that's substantially more professional than our
yeah,
social media.
definitely.
I mean, I think it can vary. I mean, as a string quartet, we're very portable. Good thing, and it's just the only extra really expense in terms of traveling is extra seat for the cello.
Right. You don't have to bring a piano along.
You don't have to bring a piano. Well, pianists don't have to bring pianos along, but we get to play our own instruments. So,
Right.
so I mean, it's easy for us to book a lot of concerts. Not easy necessarily, but we're a little cheaper than a larger ensemble would be.
Right.
So we do have a lot of big presenters booking us, which is great, and so they do a lot of publicity for us to get people to their concert series. But a different organization, a larger new music organization or just a larger ensemble would probably have to do a lot of that kind of that kind of publicity themselves, and maybe even hire someone to do that, or just be really good at doing that.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
it's
are
an
you-
important
you were-
important part.
You were part of hustling for gigs sort of early
Yeah.
on in the history of the quartet, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of students are probably thinking the same thing. Like, I got a group together, some friends, we make, I think, a good product. How do we get a concert?
Well, there's several ways. I mean, in that week with the Kronos Quartet, they told us something that was really important. They said, perform as much as you can. And so, and that's the way you get your product out there. You can't just expect to write to someone and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, book me. If you have nothing to show for what you're doing, then they don't know if you can actually do what you're saying you do. So we played a lot of concerts in New York early on at these tiny little venues, with cockroaches running across the floor. But playing the music we really wanted to play for $5 at the door kind of thing. Maybe be able to pay for half a beer after the show. But it created buzz. It created buzz. It especially created buzz for us. It was important to be in New York City where there's so much new music happening, and it created buzz in that community, and then it kind of broadened from there. But we also needed to keep this going and be able to, make it work. We had to make some money off of it. So I had to find gigs that actually did pay. And so what I found was helpful for us because of our product. Because what we were doing was I contacted composers. I contacted composition departments, and that over time developed many good relationships with composers and departments that we've gone to over many years. And initially, we'd go to these places and we'd do a reading session for the young composers there, and perform a concert. Sometimes we'd perform pieces by members of the faculty. And that's how these relationships started. But over the years, eventually the string departments at those schools got more interested in what we were doing, and so we've done more master classes and teaching and that kind of thing, and it's really developed. But it took a lot of emailing, a lot of phone calls. Just you have to be really confident in what you're doing, and just it's really hard to sell yourself. It's really hard to say, I am so great, book me. But that's what you have to do. You have to be completely confident that you are the one and only person, or your group is the one and only group that they need to have. And you need to make that seem without being too arrogant. There's a fine line.
You can't say it like that, right? Like that's just
Yeah.
like how you need to feel.
You need to have that feeling when you're writing that email or you're making that phone call. You have to have that confidence. Eventually we got management, which has been, I think for us, was really beneficial because it's a lot of work to do that kind of booking. And we got busier and busier and busier, which was great for us, but then it was really hard to keep up that kind of work and keep up the artistic goal. So for us, eventually, finding management was really helpful. and there's benefits and things against that as well. And if you ever find yourself in that position, then you have to weigh all the pros and cons of that. But for us, it was really great. And so then we can kind of step back from our manager calls up the booking the presenter and says, these guys are great, book them, and we can be like, yeah, we are. But we don't have to do that kind of thing anymore. But it's important. And what's also important about if you get a presenter interested in you, is also not selling yourself too short on the fee. You have to then you have to then quote the fee that you need. And I think this is, I always say you should start higher than what you would actually take, because it's a negotiation. Right. And if a presenter is turned off really quickly, then there's probably not someone you want to be working with. But if they see the fee and say, oh, well, that's a little bit higher than we can pay, then you negotiate and maybe get down to the level where you'll take it anyways. Mm-hmm. But you have to weigh all these different things when you're doing it. So.
Chris, maybe you can pick up on this idea of the sort of artistic product. How do you keep the artistic product really high? So say everything's going well, Ari's grabbing the gigs, manager's grabbing the gigs, right? And you're really busy. What do you guys do just to make sure that the artistic quality is there?
Well, I mean, I think part of our motivation from the beginning has always been to explore new things that are either unfamiliar to us or familiar within certain communities, but not as familiar with other communities. So, when we started off, we were really excited by all these. I was at least looking in the library at all these scores by really interesting pieces that I never got to hear. So that's kind of why we started playing this stuff, and then there was actually a need for it and a value. People actually really valued it. So the music I find most exciting is that which takes risks and has challenges for us, and every piece has its own challenges. It's not just that we're doing the most complex, crazy, thorny stuff all the time. Even the most simple, slow, pure kind of sound is also equally difficult, and that's equally important for ourselves as musicians to practice, because I think if you only play one type of music all the time, then you kind of lose your chops in other realms. So even we don't tend to play standard repertoire like Beethoven, but right now we're actually working on a couple Beethoven quartets, and it's been great because it brings out a different side of our technique and chops, so that it complements the newer stuff that we do that challenges us, our brains in other ways. So it's constantly trying to look at every side of the music and bring the level expanded outward, not just going down one particular path and trying to perfect one, I mean, you can go down one path for a certain time and go down that rabbit hole to see how deep it goes, but then explore another rabbit hole.
Yeah. So Kevin, how much of your time is personal practice? How much of it is rehearsal with the group? How much of it is sort of the touring and the business stuff? Where does that balance?
That's a tricky balance, but I also compose sometimes, so I try to make time for that. And when I practice myself, I like to practice Bach a lot of the time. But then there's quartet music to look at it as well. I like to be pretty focused about that. It's less like I need to drill every lick. It's more like coming out of this big stint of rehearsals, I pick out all the problem spots and really focus on those, what I need to clean up. It's sometimes kind of more corrective surgery than a complete overhaul.
So you gotta be real tactical, real
yeah, you have to be focused. You can't I don't have the just oodles and oodles of time for everything, so it's really about efficiency for me. I think quality of practice time is in many ways more important than quantity. If you can get a quantity of quality practice, that's good too. But I think some people, I think it's really common for students and professionals too to measure their success with practicing in terms of the number of hours. But you can, I've heard students in practice rooms before, like when I was in school, drilling the same lick over and over again at tempo and making the same mistake over and over again, and that is not really going to help you. It's much better to slow down, really feel everything out, and find the tempos where you are making the sound you want to make, and the tone production, the intonation, all of these things and then speed it back up. And the same goes for our rehearsals too. We spend a lot of time, we will plug in metronomes to speakers and we'll blast the beat and we'll drill a difficult lick and we will notch it up very slowly. And we still do this all the time. It will save you so much time in the long run compared to repeating things on loop at tempo over and over again. I just
great.
find it's not a good way to practice.
Practice
So-
slowly.
Yeah, slow.
Yeah.
So-
Maybe to wrap up, one bit of advice: if you could get in touch with your music school self when you were there, one thing you've learned since you guys have left school that you would tell yourself to pay attention to.
I would say exactly what you just said, to pay attention to the thing that gets you going.
Yeah.
It's important.
Find your inspiration.
Yeah.
Specifically to myself, practice slowly. I didn't do enough of it. Yeah, I learned my lesson later on.
Yeah, I think like just engaging in whatever I'm doing at the moment and trying to suspend judgment about, like, even if it's like a situation that I feel is not ideal or I'm frustrated with something, just paying attention to that and still putting my whole energy and engagement into everything that I do.
I think for me, it's actually not sweating the small stuff too much. You can get so caught up in, I played this concert, I missed this shift, and oh God, like, why, I'm gonna fail. It's like it can snowball so fast. These minor setbacks, you can end up taking that and putting a major roadblock in your way as a result of that. So being able to have the resilience to not let those setbacks get you down and to stay in a good workflow.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks so much for just joining us here at the University of Michigan. It's great to have you here. I'm looking forward to tonight's content.